You're back. That makes me happy. As an old woman, I know what it means to lose friendships. My community rejected me, and for years I walked a lonely road. But in time, God gave me friendships that were worth the wait, ones that became my greatest blessing. If you've ever felt alone, I understand. But here's a secret many don't realize. Sometimes, God isolates us so He can build a deeper relationship with us. He wants us to know that He is the best friend we could ever have. Friendship shapes us, strengthens us, and often surprises us. And in this chapter you'll see just how much it means to those in this story. Do you have a friend who values and supports you? If not, God is saying, I'm here. Now let's begin chapter 4, Friendship. Joshua gathered their gear and met Ruth by his pickup truck. She was putting a basket of food on the back seat, along with a knapsack containing their towels and clothing. We're camping on the river tonight, Ruth. You'll see how beautiful it has become since you left. His eyes sparkled and he smiled as he spoke. Yeah, I like that idea. I've missed this place. The city doesn't offer much, and what you do see is so rare that sometimes you forget what it's like to have nature around you, much less appreciate it. They drove down to the river, where Joshua had his boat docked at the local harbor. It was a small port, but there were a few boat owners in the community, and they all kept their boats here. Just as they had hardly seen anyone as they walked through the town, it was the same driving to the harbor. Things had changed very little in all the years Ruth had been away. People still kept to themselves. She wondered, however, if the kids still managed to sneak off somewhere to play without their parents knowing. Josh, have you heard from Brad lately? Ruth asked, staring out the window. Well, nothing for the past 3 months. Brad said he would be away at sea for a while. Have you? No. Ruth turned her gaze to Joshua. I've not heard from him in almost 7 months. Really? Maybe Brad just wanted to let you focus on your studies and not nag you so much with his letters, Joshua chuckled. Or maybe he's too busy now with his wife Marie. Could be, but can you blame him for becoming preoccupied with her? She is beautiful. It's just a pity. Brad was away so much at sea and never got to come home to get married. Yeah, I know, and Uncle Thomas can't wait to meet Marie. You remember that nickname the kids at school gave Brad? Stutter Hulk. Ruth roared with laughter, causing Joshua to join in. You have to admit though, Josh, Brad's size did earn him the name Hulk, and when he spoke and stuttered, it was hard for the kids to hold in their outbursts. Boy, did they feel his fist when he heard them. You know, before you and I befriended him, I don't think he had any other friends. He would always rush home right after school and would spend the evening at the dock helping Uncle Thomas until he had finished working for the day. Do you think Brad cared that his father asked us to call him Uncle? Should I really answer that? Course not. After all, our friendship made him ignore the kids at school until they too became friends with him. Brad told me we were like family to him, and he was glad his father had us while he was away. I wasn't sure he would have accepted our friendship when we asked him to go swimming with us that Saturday afternoon. I didn't think he would either. He was a bit suspicious of us at first. Uncle Thomas did well in convincing him that we meant well, though, and reminded him that he needed some friends. That's because Uncle Thomas and our parents were such close friends and he knew we were good kids. I used to love listening to all the adventures he had on the river. Yeah, those stories of his made me get my boat, and also led to Brad joining the Navy. Remember, Brad used to say, "The Navy is where I will get my adventures." Joshua mimicked Brad and laughed. Uncle Thomas tells me all the time how proud he is of Brad and how he longs to see him. Josh, I'm glad you were here for him with Brad being away. I know his company has been good for you too, especially since your dad died. Joshua put his pickup in park and turned to face Ruth. Ready? Her eyes shone bright and she smiled. As I'll ever be. The boatyard was quiet. The only person Ruth noticed was a senior man standing in front of a boat with his back turned to them. There was a familiar look about him that Ruth thought she recognized. That's mine. Joshua pointed to the boat, which the man stood facing. The man spun around at their approaching footsteps, and Ruth's eyes widened. It was Mr. Thomas, Brad's father. The man's face lit up with a broad smile when he saw them. He opened his arms for an embrace, and Ruth ran straight into them. Joshua hugged them both, and they all laughed. Their embrace lasted for quite a while. Ruth loved him like her own father. As she stared into his ever-so-gentle eyes, once so full of life and adventure, she saw little excitement in them now. She felt a bit of sadness that a life once so alive was now slowly dying. "I cannot believe it's you, Ruth. You are so grown up and lovely. I can see why Brad loved you so," Mr. Thomas said after he kissed Ruth on the cheek and looked at her. "What?" Joshua interrupted, sounding jealous. "Brad had a crush on Ruth back when you all used to hang out, but he was too shy to tell her." Mr. Thomas laughed. "Well, I never would have suspected, and we were all so close. I thought all that fondness Brad had towards Ruth was from us all being such good friends." Joshua chuckled. He felt grateful that Brad never had the nerve to pursue Ruth. He couldn't imagine Ruth with anyone else, nor could he bear the thought, so he blocked it from his mind immediately. Ruth didn't want to add anything at this point, but she knew all too well how Joshua's mind worked. "Josh, ask me what you are aching to find out about Brad." "Okay," he chuckled, finding it funny that Ruth knew his thoughts half the time. "If Brad had told you his feelings before he left, would you and he be together now?" Ruth smirked as she stared into his eyes. Then she looked over at Mr. Thomas, who had the same look, giving the impression that the old man knew what she was thinking. When she looked back to Joshua, she was met by his piercing eyes and an arched eyebrow. "No, Josh, Brad and I would not have been together now, as you and I now are." "What?" Mr. Thomas's eyes widened, and he smiled. "You two have finally figured out that you belong together." They looked at him, chuckled, and shook their heads. "Josh, even though Brad and I have been friends almost as long as you and I have been, he and I weren't meant to be together. I told Brad that I loved him, but only as a brother." "So he did tell you. When did this happen?" "Back in the university. He wrote me and confessed. I guess that was when he felt bold enough to say how he felt. And you didn't think you should tell me." "I'm sorry, Josh. I had so much to do at school." "That never prevented you from telling me anything before, Ruth. We have never kept anything from each other. And you came home to visit how many times while at the university?" He said a bit harshly. "What are you getting upset at me for? Brad told me how he felt. I hurt his feelings when I rejected him and I felt bad about it. I didn't know how to share that with you, knowing you would be negative about it, as you are now." She folded her arms and pouted. Mr. Thomas stared at them, bewildered. "I'm not angry," Joshua said, his tone much softer now. "I just thought we had no secrets between us." Ruth caressed his cheek. "We don't, sweetheart. Even back then my heart knew it belonged to you, although my head didn't realize it yet." She gave him a soft smile. "Well, what was all that drama about just now? You had me thinking that something had happened that even Uncle Thomas knew about." Joshua snapped at her, annoyed. Ruth laughed. "Sorry, sweetheart, I just wanted to see your face when you get jealous." "Don't do that, please." "I don't like that feeling," he frowned. Mr. Thomas cleared his throat to get their attention, and they laughed, realizing they had forgotten he was there. "We're sorry about that, Uncle Thomas." Joshua spoke for them both. "It's okay, you two. I'm just glad to have you both here now. I have good news to share with you." "We have good news too." They laughed as they both spoke at once. "You go first, Uncle Thomas," Ruth told him. "Brad's coming home the day after tomorrow. He retired from the Navy. He said 10 years is enough, and now he is coming home with his wife and son to raise his family here. Brad said he wanted his son to know his grandpa before his grandpa died. Now imagine me dying anytime soon." "That's great news, Uncle Thomas," Ruth laughed. "Hey, Uncle Thomas, how come you didn't tell me that when I saw you 2 days ago?" Joshua questioned. "I got the letter about an hour ago and I was going to tell you tonight, but fate gave me both of you at once." "What's your good news? Should I tell him or do you want to?" Joshua asked Ruth. "You tell him," she said, then held his hand. "We're getting married, Uncle Thomas. We're getting married." Joshua choked back his tears as his emotions almost got the best of him. Mr. Thomas knew, even more than Ruth did, how much he had missed her while she was away. Mr. Thomas hugged them both and gave them his blessing. "Okay, Uncle Thomas, we'll talk more tomorrow when we return," Joshua told him. "All right, see you tomorrow." He turned and walked away. That's it for today's chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next episode, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss it. If this story speaks to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Marshally would love to hear from you. See you in the next chapter.